Panelists here are the smart ones on this subject, so I'm going to start by allowing them to introduce themselves and talk about their seat in this role.
Hi, my name is Phil Bartel. I spent this cycle as the Deputy Director of the NRSC IE, overseeing all the persuasion digital advertising that occurred on the IE. Previous to that, I'm a Wisconsin native, got my start working at the state party and for Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin. Spent a year in Alaska serving as Political Director for Senator Dan Sullivan. And most recently before the NRSC was at I360, political data.
Hi, I'm Luke Partridge. As you may be able to tell, I'm one of those foreign actors who's trying to influence the election. I work at a global strategy group where I sit somewhere in between our sort of research and digital operations, really understanding sort of social listening side of things. And this cycle we were working with both a number of outside groups and also Tish James' campaign for Attorney General.
Hi, my name is Aimee Stern. I am a PR person and a former journalist, and in the summer of 2018, I decided to stop whining and go work in politics. So I went to work for the Andrew Gillum campaign in Florida, and I'm here to talk about what I learned.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. I think the first thing where I want to start here is you all had very different seats in the 2018 cycle, like very different roles. And I'd love to just start with getting your first blush reaction on a takeaway, whether it was something that surprised you from this last cycle or something that still keeps you up at night from this last cycle. Why don't we just go right down the line here? Phil, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. I think something that really surprised me this cycle is looking at, on the Republican side, our candidates were pretty badly outraised in most races, particularly on the small dollar side. That being said, maintain an advantage in digital spending. If you look at Google's transparency dashboard, the top 3 spenders were Republican groups. 5 of the top 6 were Republican groups, Priorities and S&P being the exception there. And I think when you look at the fact in an IE context, the fact that as an IE we're paying the same rates as a campaign is, we're not paying higher rates like we would on TV, that was something that really allowed Republicans to close the gap and stay competitive in some of these races, even though we were being outspent pretty badly. And I think you've seen recently with Priorities announcing kind of a move more so towards digital advertising this cycle. That's an advantage we may unfortunately not have in 2020.
Luke?
I would say this biggest surprise was perhaps how quickly everyone adapted to the new reality, the sudden huge amount of transparency you have into what your opponents are doing, the huge amount of extra admin work, frankly, on our side just to get stuff up and running. It was a bit like showing up to play the final of Wimbledon and finding out that you're actually a 12-round boxing match rather than playing tennis. So what we saw was people really quickly adapting and really quickly within this new reality coming up with ways of doing both what they've done before and also exciting new ways of doing new things. In terms of what keeps me up at night still, I have a recurring dream of them when we spoke to our Facebook rep and found that, and he said that you needed a US passport in order to advertise it. That was not good news for me. So that still brings back some nightmares.
Did that get resolved?
Yes.
Okay, good. How about you, Aimee?
Well, what surprised me in terms of social media was that we didn't really have a strategy. We put lots of that up. But we didn't have a strategy that said, this is our candidate, this is what he stands for, these are all the appearances that he's making. Why aren't we taking that data and what he says and bringing it into Facebook? And, you know, even the Instagram photos weren't that interesting. They were just a picture here, he's in Tallahassee, he's here, he's there. And I thought we could have used that medium so much better. I was in the Palm Beach campaign office, and so we had this incredibly motivated amount of volunteers who just were so gung-ho for Andrew Gillum. And they had a lot to say and to share. And when they put things up on Facebook, they got taken down sometimes. They weren't allowed to post video or photos. I mean, I see it as a real missed opportunity.
That's actually a really good segue into, I think, a question that a lot of people have already started asking me, and I'm sure everybody on this panel you're getting asked this as well, or about to be in the next several months. But when people inevitably come up to you and say, okay, now how do I do what Beto did? Or how do I do what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did? Like, what do you tell them? Start with you, Luke.
I think that what we find, there's a lot of people asking that question, and I think there's probably two halves to the answer. The first is that we've got to spend money on digital. Beto outspent anyone else on Facebook by a factor of 2. Now, granted, a lot of that was fundraising, but not all of it. A lot of it was sort of persuasion and spreading a really a positive message that worked really well on the money is key. I think alongside that, some of what these transformative candidates are doing, it seems strange in the world of politics. I couldn't. There was a couple of things going around, but those approaches, that sort of when Cortez responded to the dancing video by filming herself dancing in the halls of Congress. That's something that's ripped straight out of the playbook of any sort of YouTube influencer you can think of. The response video is the type of thing that you might see sort of Logan Paul, who's got his own troubles this week, but that's the sort of thing you might see him doing. And that's the kind of content that plays really well. So I would say that learn from what's already successful on the channels rather than what's already successful for candidates. And that might be the best way of approaching it. It's not going to work for everyone because, I mean, it's a little bit of the Bane, you adopted the darkness, I was born in it sort of approach to politics. There have to be natural for it to work. But I think learning from what's already taking place on there outside is
I think you have to speak their truth. The process of Beto and Andrew, people got caught up in it. They believed in them. There was a fervor, and it can be through videos. People want to vote for people. They don't want to vote for a ticket, and that was something that I learned. Was when Gillum won the primary in Florida, no one expected him to win, and no one knew what to do. We had a 45-day gap where and the final, where we didn't have material, we didn't have that much access to the candidates. We just were waiting for the Democrats, and I apologize to those who are in the room, to come up with a strategy for what we were supposed to do. And it took a long time, and the strategy that came up was, let's go for a blue wave, as opposed to let's focus on the individuals. And I think it cost us.
Phil, you have anything to add to?
Sure. I mean, I think some of this isn't new. It all starts with the candidate. Voters have always craved authenticity and a message that's going to resonate with them. But what is changing is how people consume information. And so I guess I would advise a potential candidate, first you need to be creating content that's going to perform well on these platforms, and invest and put money behind it. I think the other thing that's going to be interesting to watch is how does this influence the traditional communications operation. I think you're seeing that Twitter is really the new press release, where you could have campaigns that don't really even maintain a press release, where a lot of this, instead of being via email and in a traditional press shop, is really all going to move to social media this cycle.
I think, one thing I'd like to, so pivoting away a little bit from the candidate campaigns, Luke, you did a lot of work with the gun violence prevention activist community this in past cycles. And the Parkland tragedy, I think we saw student activists emerge, it really stood out in this space, especially on digital. And I guess my question for you is, what do you think helped make that happen? Was it the students themselves? Was it, I mean, obviously it was partly the students themselves, but what else was behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. We do a lot of work around social listening and trying to sort of understand, listen to individual groups of voters rather than just sort of, what's happening writ large on Twitter or what's happening writ large on Facebook. We've worked a lot over the course of the past year or so to really look at what different groups of voters are saying, matching people up to the voter file and sort of understanding, okay, how and when do people react to what's going on online. And what we found, particularly in relation to the Parkland tragedy, was that while at first, perhaps, it was obviously the students were out there creating, an amazing amount of noise, and that kept Democratic Party activists engaged. It was only once the opportunity to sort of bring political identities to the fore online, once sort of it became a partisan issue, that the wider sort of Democratic base got involved. And this is something we see sort of universally across the board. Once there is an opportunity to go out there and sort of advocate for your team, sort of stand there with your placard and say, this is what I stand for, along with other Democrats, along with other Republicans, that is one of the greatest motivators for people to actually participate in line. We did another project where we looked back at 2016 and found that there were people who we knew for certain, because we'd looked at the file, hadn't voted in key states, who during the healthcare fight were prepared to sort of go up and sort of, this is the, you have to contact your senator right now, this is the right email address to do that at. So if you think it's just like it's a small group of really hyper-engaged individuals who are active online, it's not. It's everyone, and it's even people who are sort of engaged audiences who you need to reach. It
was your point that that's 2016 was a flashpoint there, and since then, and under Trump, like that's changed a lot?
Yeah, I think that what we saw then and what we continue to see now is the importance of identities to, there's been a lot of discussions of the identity conversation around 2016. I think the importance of understanding the identities you're trying to activate online when you think about a social strategy, and how those interplay is more important than ever.
And Aimee, this actually brings me to the question I wanted to ask you, which is, speaking of identity, right, and the individual candidates themselves potentially in 2020. Your background in marketing, you help executives kind of defy conventional wisdom in their strategies. So, I guess from the candidate's standpoint, how much is success in 2020 going to be determined by the people who are like willing to break the rules, do the dancing in the halls of Congress? Like, how would you define that kind of level of success?
Well, I think you have to be brave. You really have to get out there and talk about what you believe in. We saw in 2016 there was a lot of wishy-washiness, and it cost us a lot. I always come back, for a while I worked for a company called the Mom Complex, which does research with moms for consumer goods companies. And one of the first things I learned when I started working for them was that moms don't tell the truth. They want to appear like better moms than they are. Motherhood is fraught with all sorts of insecurities. I think the same thing is often true of the voting public. And so you really have to get beneath the surface and not believe the first thing that you're told. I'm going to vote for so-and-so because these things change. And it takes more talking to people one-on-one and really pushing to get their viewpoints and to understand. We all saw these televised, quote-unquote, town halls done by the media where everybody seemed to be pretty scripted. But I always wondered, what happens when the lights go off? What do they really say? And I think what do they really say is really the answer to whether or not you're going to win.
That's great. And one of the descriptors of our panel, we wanted to dig in a lot on the Facebook policy changes and whatnot. And, Phil, you sat pretty closly to this cycle. You've probably spent a lot of time thinking about these policy changes. I don't know. If it was me, I would be losing my hair. I did lose a lot of my hair this cycle. Not that you can see. But, how does the kind of self-policing changed your approach as an advertiser? And from your position, what are they getting right, and where are they still missing the mark? The Facebooks, the Googles.
Sure. I think there were two big ways it changed our approach to social advertising this cycle. The first, changed out the only place we could advertise was in the newsfeed on Facebook because that was the only place Facebook could build room for the disclaimer. So what we quickly found was that meant that running video advertising there that had been great in previous cycles suddenly was extremely expensive on a cost per viewed second basis. So we had to kind of pivot away from that. At the same time, what we found is that it worked great for rapid response. Obviously, if you're a campaign trying to do lead generation for fundraising, that's where you're going to spend the bulk of your budget. It's still a great place to be, but we found that video didn't work great in the news feed. But what we found as an IE, from an IE's perspective, that worked really well was using it for rapid response. And so, for example, during the Kavanaugh hearings, we ran a lot of very simple display advertising as Democrats in red states announced their opposition. And we actually found that a third of the total interactions that we had for the entire cycle occurred in the week following that hearing on Facebook. So that was something that performed great for us. With the changes, the other thing that kind of altered our approach was the introduction of the transparency dashboards, both on Facebook and Google. It was helpful as an IE that can't talk to the campaigns or other outside groups to be able to see what creatives were running, who was up, who was not. And the other thing is I think it kind of marks a shift of digital being more like TV with traditional competitive tracking. I think in the long run, hopefully it makes it easier for digital marketers to kind of get their seat at the table and earn budget because you can see, right now no one wants to lose a campaign because they're outspent on TV. And I think hopefully we'll see digital kind of move in that direction where no one wants to get outspent on digital either. In terms of kind of what they did right and where they missed the mark, I think the rollout was about as smooth as we could have hoped for on most platforms. Getting verified was fairly simple, as long as you put some planning into it and add a US passport. So that wasn't a huge challenge. In terms of places where they may miss the mark, I think you saw Vice did an article where they were able to run ads as all 100 US senators simply by getting the disclaimer right. So that's concerning. You've seen some reporting recently about some things that happened in Alabama with accounts that probably should have been shut down by Facebook that weren't. And I think that moving forward, a big thing for them is going to be, as they're trying to police this content, is number one, avoiding any real bias. I think you saw early in the cycle, like there was some pro-life advertising on the Republican side that was flagged, not allowed to run, and that was eventually resolved. So avoiding any perceived bias that's going to kind of feed into this anti-tech sentiment that is becoming more prevalent. So I think that's a potential pitfall they really need to avoid moving forward.
Is there anything else to add to that, or how are we doing on time? We're good? I think the one thing you mentioned, Phil, that I wanted to get a little bit more on is the transparency piece, like actually affecting strategy. So you're seeing in real time, or buys or estimated buys from some of maybe your opponents, maybe the groups you can't talk to. How much were you actually, how much more work did that add to your plate to monitor this stuff? And then how much did it actually affect your buying strategy?
Yeah, I think it didn't influence as much as maybe TV competitive does because it was backward looking and not forward looking. You can't see forward reservations, obviously, at the moment. But it was definitely something we were able to look at and see, in a state, are we extremely light on digital? Is our candidate not up at all? Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to prod them to fix that, but we can maybe go in and spend more money there to supplement it. And so it's something that, is one of the first things I was looking at each time the dashboard refreshed, was looking at, what content is running, how does this fit into the broader messaging we're trying to push, and is someone just not up at all and we need to go in and remedy that.
I think I want to ask one more question to the panel for everybody to react to, and maybe have some time for questions from the audience. So 2020, what's a bold prediction you'd make for the cycle, knowing that bold predictions are really, really stupid to make? So sorry, I'm the one setting you guys up to look foolish here. Why don't we start with Aimee? Sorry, with that.
I thought you were looking at him. Well, I think we're going to have a female president. Thank you very much. But that, that's just me. What I wanted to say was what I would like to see in the 2020 campaign is the fundraising piece and the outreach piece and the social media piece coordinate, because there were a lot of messages that were out there that were fighting with each other. And I think from what I saw and what I was told, people got really frustrated. So for instance, you'd have a candidate who on her Facebook page would, be very proud of the fact that they'd raised more money than anyone else that month. And we're doing this and we're doing this. And then, they'd be sending out from the fundraising piece these dramatic messages that say, well, we have to go dark by Friday if we don't get money. And so I think, and there was a lot of that. And I just think that people have to talk to each other. And I know they're run by different organizations, but it gets very confusing, and I think it really distracts from the core messages of the campaign and the candidate.
Luke?
I think that, playing on something that Phil mentioned earlier, Democrats are going to get wiser to YouTube in particular. Just looking at the sort of the raw numbers, YouTube is, I think 74% of American adults say that they use YouTube. Only 68% say that for Facebook, and the amount of time spent on Facebook is, as has been widely covered, in decline. It's particularly impactful among the core groups for Democrats. The over-indexes among African Americans, over-indexes among Hispanic populations, among people with college degrees or post-college degrees. And I think of 18 to 24-year-olds, 91% say they use YouTube. So the groups that we think of as being the most important to the Democratic coalition are very active in a space where, as Phil mentioned, 4 of the top 5 spenders on YouTube were Republican groups, or on Google, but I think with a large portion of that being YouTube. So I think that thinking about YouTube as a way, as a place where Democratic candidates like the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's, younger, more sort of inspiring candidates have really good stories to tell in that format, and as I mentioned earlier, it's like the people who are already being successful on YouTube. So finding ways to add that to the mix and spend more there, I think will be important.
How about you, Phil?
I think what we'll see is a huge shift towards text messaging in 2020. You look at, things we touched on about how it's becoming somewhat more difficult to run on social. I think you're going to see a rise in peer-to-peer texting, not just for fundraising, but for direct engagement and persuasion. I think you're going to see campaigns looking for a way to kind of create their own new social channel, go around the existing channels, communicate directly with voters. And I think you've seen, President Trump's re-election campaign did a lot of that this cycle already, where they were, requiring a mobile number to get into his rallies. And so I think, that's something that they'll be focused on. I think you'll see many other campaigns invest heavily in peer-to-peer texting as well.
Do we have time for
Yes,
questions?
we do.
From the audience?
Let's get some
What
questions.
we got?
I wanted to follow up on Luke's point about YouTube. Were all of you seeing more money move away from Facebook and towards YouTube this cycle? And on YouTube, what formats were really working? Were we really just talking about pre-rolls? Were we talking about sort of the hero videos that Beto and AOC were famous for? What sort of activity, and if any, social activity, were you seeing on YouTube that sort of foreshadows what we might be seeing in the next cycle?
Sure. I think on the persuasion side, yes, we probably did see a shift more towards YouTube and away from Facebook. I think that's less true on the direct response side of things. I think for us, something that worked really well this cycle was 6-second bumper ads. We were able to get in on a beta and actually reserve that inventory early in many states. And it was basically something we did where we were talking to our creative team, where we basically said we would never sign off on a 30 or a 15 if it couldn't be done as a 6-second as well. And so that was something that we found really valuable as an inexpensive way to reinforce messaging and get higher frequency on a message that we were also pushing in a 15 or a 30-second creative as well.
I would just add to that we have done a lot of work sort of testing various modes of advertising, and sort of particularly with the eye to persuasion, and sequenced video has a really running ad. Sort of, you see one ad, you see the next ad, you see the next ad, and telling a more complete story that way that involves both 6 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds. Using that for a sort of more holistic approach is very effective.
I wanted to go back to something you said about the advocacy groups in Florida and across the country. I have never seen such energy and such positive momentum in groups like Moms Demand Action, which came out constantly for our candidate and for other candidates across the state. And I think that that should really be part of what we look at. It's not, for us it was almost like a giant gift, but I think that the candidates and the parties should be talking to these people on a regular basis, because they will man booths, they will come out, they will, and they're so excited and so positive. It's just a wonderful way to motivate people and to get large groups of people to come to things and to do things for your candidates.
Was this video channel, following up on Phil's point of persuasion in YouTube, and your use of bumper ads, was it, and also yours about the messaging, I'm curious about the sort of messaging that was working on YouTube. Did it tend to be more positive and policy-oriented as opposed to negative campaigning on that channel?
I think from our perspective, we ran almost exclusively negative advertising. It's just kind of the role of an IE. We found Google actually introduced the ability to track negative brand lift late in the cycle. And we did find that those creatives performed very well sometimes in terms of moving the ballot just as well as a positive would have.
You're saying people still like negative ads even though they say they don't?
Even exactly. We'll see them on YouTube too. Back here?
Hi, my name is Satsi Lemaire. I actually work at an ad agency, Census, but I also worked on the Beto campaign, the Senatorial campaign last year, and it was really exciting. But my question to the panel, well, first let me address the dentist video, because it's gotten a lot of attention, but if you listen to the conversation with the dental hygienist who was an immigrant, that was really what, the reasoning behind the dental video. But my question to you guys is, how do you capture the crowdsourcing when it comes to content development for Facebook? You mentioned that you have all these great stories and people sharing videos. How do you capture it, establish some sort of guidelines for bringing it into the overarching campaign? So we have tons of opportunities with people that want to participate and have a lot to say. How do you bring it all into the campaign?
Well, it really comes down to strategy. I mean, what are the messages you want to push, and how, in what venues can we best portray them? So for instance, if you want to be, in Palm Beach, we had an issue with the Jewish community, which was very divided. And a lot of the work that I did was talking to rabbis and doing outreach into that community, because the DeSantis campaign was, claiming that they were more pro-Israel than Andrew Gillum was, and there were all these rumors flying around. But it just, so we set up a temple presentation where he spoke there. And it was just beautiful. I mean, he spoke from the heart, and he told a story of his history with the Jewish people. And I think something like that would have been a fabulous YouTube video. He talked about how his children went to a Jewish preschool, and something that he'd seen in the classroom every because somebody was having a bad day. And I'm thinking, goodness, this is exactly what people need. And I think if you can plan ahead of time to record those and to edit them properly, they would change the whole nature of your campaign.
But on the crowdsourcing...
Did I not answer your question?
But on the crowdsourcing, right? How do you get your supporters to, create the videos, to feed, so that you are not... There was so much content that Beto produced. And hours of live stream that we could do, to put that out there. Mm-hmm. But how do you get people to put their personal stories? So I worked on Hispanic outreach, and unfortunately the campaign took a long time to execute the strategy that I recommended, specifically targeting Hispanics. But we wanted okay, I wanted to really tell the stories of Tejanos, you know, why they were supporting Beto and put those videos out there. But it was just, it was such a giant to tackle in terms of getting all this video from you know, crowdsourcing from the actual supporters and then bringing it into the campaign platform. So I'm trying to, I think for 2020, it's going to be a really important, going back to the trust issue and building trust, listening from the voters themselves versus just the candidate, but also the people, you know, you listen to your peers. Why are you supporting this candidate?